This episode was made possible by Wix. Build your own professional website with Wix by following the link below. The pre-revolution years were full of tension and turmoil in the colonies that would become the United States of America. Take, for example, one of the most inflammatory events of the time, one that helped set the stage for the American Revolution, the Boston Massacre. Before we get to the actual event, let's set the stage with a little historical background. The year was 1770. It had been 2 long years since 2 regiments of British regulars had been stationed in Boston to restore respect for British law. Many of the locals hated the British soldiers. Townspeople were upset because the British would often accept part-time work for lower pay, which Bostonians saw as stealing their jobs. Local sailors saw British occupation as a constant threat of impressment, the law which authorized colonists to be pressed into service in the British Navy. In the frozen early months of 1770, escalations between Bostonians and the soldiers were on the rise. On March 2nd, a fistfight broke out between British soldiers and locals after one man asked a soldier if he was looking for work. When the soldier responded that he was told to go clean the man's outhouse, in less pleasant terms. 3 days later, on the evening of March 5th, trouble began brewing all over the city. As with many conflicts, it began with a simple dispute, this time between a wigmaker's apprentice named Edward Garrick and Captain John Goldfinch, a passing soldier. Garrick insulted Goldfinch as he walked by the store, claiming that the captain had not paid what he owed for a new wig. Goldfinch ignored the apprentice, but a nearby sentry named Hugh White took offense, walked over, and after a brief and heated argument, struck Garrick with his musket and knocked him down. The confrontation had drawn a crowd, which became furious after White assaulted the young man. The crowd grew to about 50 people, many of whom began throwing chunks of ice at the soldier and threatening him with derogatory names. White fled to the local custom house, loaded his gun, and pleaded for the soldiers inside to come defend him. Not far from the scene, a second mob had assembled and began pelting a group of soldiers with ice and snowballs, forcing them to retreat into their barracks. Meanwhile, a third, more dangerous mob, nearly 200 strong and carrying clubs, had formed in Dock Square. They rang the fire bells to draw more civilians into the streets and began to march towards the custom house. The officer of the day, Captain Thomas Preston, was in a difficult spot. If he didn't organize his troops, the mob might kill Hugh White. But sending out more men would put them all in trouble and potentially escalate the situation even further. After almost half an hour of thinking, Preston decided the only thing to do was rescue White. The captain and 7 other men marched out, forced their way through the crowd, and stood by the terrified soldier. Now they were stuck. The mob, which had grown to over 300, was pressing in and throwing ice, chunks of coal, oyster shells, anything they could get their hands on. One man named Crispus Attucks grabbed a soldier's bayonet and knocked him to the ground. As the man got back to his feet, he yelled at the other soldiers to fire, even though he had no authority, and thus began what became known as the Boston Massacre. Crispus Attucks was shot twice in the chest. Another man was quoted to have been shot in the head as he stood with his hands in his pockets, leaving a hole the size of a man's hand. All told, 5 civilians were killed and another half-dozen injured before Captain Preston, by his own account, was able to get his men under control. To make a long story short, Preston and his men were arrested and held for trial. Over the next 7 months, various accounts of the event began to pop up in newspapers across the colonies, and especially in London, each one skewing the facts to present an argument against the other side. The Bostonians wanted the British soldiers out, and somewhat surprisingly, though after considerable public pressure, the British agreed. The morning after the soldiers were arrested, a local visited future President John Adams, then a Boston attorney, and begged him to represent the soldiers at their trials. Despite the considerable risk to his reputation and his career, Adams agreed, as he felt that every person deserved a defense. The trial would be interesting for a number of reasons. First, it was an intensely politically charged event. Notable figures such as Samuel Adams and John Hancock were thoroughly opposed to British occupation, and the incident undoubtedly led to more extreme ideas. Second, it was the first recorded use of the dying declaration exception to the rule that excludes hearsay evidence. One of the victims of the shooting, Patrick Carr, lived for a short time after the incident, and told his surgeon that he forgave whoever it was that shot him, and that the British had acted in self-defense. In the end, despite much anger and heated debate outside the courthouse, the soldiers were all acquitted of murder, and only 2 of them were punished by branding. Adams's closing statement was brief and poignant, and it's worth repeating here. He said, "Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence, nor is the law less stable than the fact. If an assault was made to endanger their lives, the law is clear. They had a right to kill in their own defense. If it was not so severe as to endanger their lives, yet if they were assaulted at all, struck and abused by blows of any sort, by snowballs, oyster shells, cinders, clubs, or sticks of any kind, this was a provocation, for which the law reduces the offense of killing down to manslaughter, in consideration of those passions in our nature which cannot be eradicated. To your candor and justice I submit the prisoners and their cause." Despite the tragedy and despite the nearly universal hatred of British occupation in Boston, John Adams stuck to the principles that all of us should strive to hold: a respect for objective evidence, the law, and rational thought. The legacy of the Boston Massacre has been controversial, even down to the name. Was it really a massacre if the mob incited the violence? Then again, was shooting into the crowd really the only option? The incident raises important questions even today, nearly 2.5 centuries later. America was founded on the right to peaceful assembly, and while the crowd in Boston was certainly not peaceful, at what point does it become acceptable to shoot civilians? Self-defense is a valid argument and will generally hold up in most modern court cases, but should there be more repercussions for the use of deadly force, especially by those who have access to more lethal weapons, like the police and the military? From the civilian standpoint, it would appear that the only way to effect change is to resort to violence, and the civil unrest that sparked the American Revolution would seem to support that idea. What does that say about modern protests? Are peaceful assemblies still effective, or do those calling for more drastic actions have the right idea? What would happen if police killed a handful of protesters in 2018? Would the legal outcome be the same, even with the drastically lopsided difference in firepower? We can often gain key insights into how society will respond to certain events by looking to the past and seeing how our forefathers reacted. In today's polarized and volatile social landscape, a bit of historical perspective might be a good thing. What do you think? Is violence against protesters ever justified? Or on the other side, is violence against law enforcement ever justified? Was John Adams right in defending the soldiers who killed those 5 people? What do you think would happen if there were a second Boston Massacre today? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you really have a lot to say about the issue, why not compile all your thoughts on a beautiful new website from Wix? With Wix, you can build amazing professional websites for just about any application. Wix can handle any project you throw at it, whether you want to host videos, share your photo gallery, book clients, sell products, or just about anything else you could ever want. Whether you need a professional website for your own personal use, or for e-commerce, music, hotels, or restaurants, Wix does all the heavy lifting like hosting, custom domains, email marketing, and more, allowing you to focus on the creative side of things. You have total creative freedom over your websites, allowing for limitless possibilities. And you don't even have to be a web designer. Wix caters to everyone regardless of skill level. So whether you're a novice, business owner, or seasoned website builder, if you want to build your very own professional website, visit Wix by following the link below.